All right, now let me do a quick bio here of Jack Dolan and get Jack up here. Jack Dolan is Vice President, Product Quality Performance Improvement, J.D. Power, where he leads activity leveraging data and insights to improve client product quality and business performance. Mr. Dolan joined J.D. Power from Lordstown Motor Corporation when he served as chief engineer leading new EV programs, value optimization activities. Prior to that, Jack was executive vice president Americas for A2 Mac 1 LLC, a global automotive benchmarking firm. Previously, he spent nearly 33 years with Fiat Chrysler Automobiles in a variety of senior leadership roles in product development, manufacturing, quality, including positions as chief engineer, architecture line executive, and head of advanced engineering for the company's North American portfolio. Mr. Dolan holds a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from the University of Detroit, a master's of science in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan, Dearborn, and a master's of business administration from Michigan State University Executive MBA program. I bring you Jack.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Chris. And I mean, first I want to say just how really privileged I am to be here today. Something powerful for me is that I'm actually going on my 5-year point as a retiree. My friend Graham Henkel jazzed me a little bit yesterday saying it's a half a decade. So it's getting to be a sizable number, but I'm rather familiar with NCRO. And I mean, I absolutely feel privileged to be here. I know the kind of speakers you had before. So my goal today is to do a little bit of, let's say, looking back in the history of Chrysler from my point of view, my life at Chrysler, share with you some insights about the future of mobility, what's happening in the transportation industry, and really reflect on that in totality. Talk about maybe, let's say, life through my eyes. I thought maybe the punchki were going to be eaten, and that would give everybody a bit of a sugar high to stay alert. So if you're feeling weak at all, please indulge. The way I decided to share this content with you was a little bit on this trip that's illustrated on the screen. A little bit for me, it starts at the bottom with this getting to Detroit. I was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and I'll explain that a little bit. What brought me to Detroit, and later on, what really gave me a passion to come to Chrysler. And then that middle part, that road sign, is really about what I call Highland Park and beyond. My life in Highland Park that started there and finished when I retired working in Auburn Hills. I'll talk about some design and development projects I did. I mean, really privileged opportunity I had to work in different functions in the company. And then I'll spend a rather large amount of time on, so to speak, life on the outside, what it's meant to me to work in this industry called data and analytics. Startup life, where I worked at Lordstown Motors, is a fascinating period of my life, and I'd like to share with you some interesting things about that, also related to electrification. I formed briefly an LLC to do some private consulting, and I'll give you some insight on that, and I'll say some interesting points about that. Then on the right side of the sign, I want to talk a little bit about the role of China as it relates to automotive. It's a very powerful mechanism, and let's say, particularly in my current capacity, I'm heavily involved and I have a good awareness of that. So I want to give you some insights about that. Also, what's happening in other global markets. Then I decided, because I'm personally spending so much time on artificial intelligence, that this could be a little bit of a brief tutorial about AI. You probably read about AI all the time. And I want to talk about that a little bit, what it can mean for us together, what it means to me, and some opportunities. And then finally, basically, I'll close on with some reflection. I mean, I thought this was a good place to start. I read the book on the left, and if any of you have not read that, I really recommend it. It's not his autobiography, but it's a book about Walter P. Chrysler, and that book is amazing. It kind of chronicles his life over the years. The image on the right, which I was not completely familiar with, but in 1928, Walter P. Chrysler was named Time Magazine Man of the Year. The vehicle in the middle is the Chrysler 6 that he introduced in 1924. So 100 years ago, it was in January of 1924. So 100 years ago today, essentially. And when he received the award as Time Man of the Year, he generated this quote, which says, "I like to build things. I like to do things. I am having a lot of fun." And I think as much as anything, frankly, that reflects, I would say, the privileged life I've had at Chrysler. I like to do all those things too. And the most important thing for me is to find a way to have fun. I've been privileged to do that. And I'll share with you a little bit about why I think that's really, really important. So I'll start with this idea about getting to Detroit. I was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and my dad was foreman at what was a big part of the industry at the day was the steel industry. He worked for a company called Bethlehem Steel, and it's interesting to me when Jay talks about the pension benefits. Bethlehem Steel, to some degree, if you don't know that, is a bit of a poster child for, I'll say, companies not being represented well in their stakes. So certainly, what I realize today is that a place like Bethlehem Steel absolutely could have benefited from employee retiree organization and influence in industry. So, I mean, it certainly makes me really privileged as a retiree to know that this committee exists. And I really respect, like what that sign says, that there's 15 years here of people working on making things better. Back to what was going on for me. I'm just a car freak by my nature, to be perfectly honest. More than hitting the books all the time, I was reading those books a little bit, car magazines, and really building this idea of what could I do. I go back to my dad. My dad was telling me this advice: find, if you're lucky enough, find something that you really enjoy and make that your career. If you can do that, then, you know, they say you really don't work. Your hobby can become your work, so to speak. And I realized I'm really fortunate about that. I became rather convinced at an early age that this was it, is that I wanted to be a automotive engineer. Those on the right are some illustrations of brochures of the time. I was kind of a freak. Who knew that that three-pointed star would become part of our company? I was a Mercedes freak and new Corvette fan and so forth. The message really I want to say here is follow your heart. And that doesn't have to be just about this, but I felt, and I've been privileged to experience it when my heart's in it. I would say it's pretty much it's easy. A couple other things I just want to say about that were that my dad also taught me this thing about, let's call it mentoring and giving back a little bit. And I've done a lot of that. Mostly I've been on the receiving side of that. There's so many people, some here today, but throughout my life, who actually made this possible for me to achieve what I've done. And I'll share with you along the way, what really feels best for me is giving back a little bit. Back to my getting to Detroit. So I transferred to the University of Detroit. I worked in the co-op program at this company called the Bud Company, which is kind of interesting, even related to Chrysler a little bit. That's might be hard for you to see in the back, but that's an aerial shot of the Charlevoix facility. And for some of you that know that, that actually sits on the grounds of what's today the Jefferson and Mack assembly complex. It basically sits in that environment from Jefferson North. There's the cool building where I worked at the front, and this place is demolished now, but in the day, that was the site, I think in 1904, 1908, of the founding of a company called Liberty Motor Car Company in Detroit. And it's too bad that place isn't there anymore, but it's basically a replica of Independence Hall. So I had the chance to work in this place. I worked under a guy by the name of Bill Kazera, who went on to like great success in the industry. And I'm going to say this many times, I'm going to mention a number of people because the technology is really cool. I'll say my stories about people, and it's certainly about the products, and a passion that I had, but the people really become the most important. And when I worked at that company, Bill really took me under his wing, gave me a picture of what it could be like working in the industry, which had a really synergistic effect. It made me want to study more and come to work in the industry. I mean, the only thing is I really decided that I didn't just want to work on wheels and brakes. I wanted to work on cars complete. And then I set my mind to work at a car company, basically. And it wasn't yet Chrysler. There was a company I wanted to go to, and it was General Motors. I had this passion for GM. Frankly, my idea of getting to Detroit turned into getting to GM. This car, I probably spent a disproportionate amount of my time speccing that car out, thinking of how I would equip it. My life was all about that. Could I find a job at General Motors as an engineer, and could I have that car? My life was pretty simple. That's really what I had in mind. But I changed. I achieved that goal. I was fortunate enough to get a job offer coming out of school to go work at Chevrolet. And that's all the stuff on the left. But then something kind of crazy happened at campus one day. I was walking through the student center, for employee job fair, and I ran into a guy by the name of Dick Rossio, and he was a recruiter at the university, and he talked to me a little bit about what life was like at Chrysler. Now, picture I had landed this dream job of my life. GM, at least in the day, was still the deal. But Mr. Rossio made such an impression on me. He said, "Hey, come to Highland Park. Come see what it's like." He paid the ultimate respect to General Motors, but he basically said, just trust me, Jack. If you come over, you'll see it could be a different environment completely. You'll roll your sleeves up and you'll do things. And I would say after that, the rest was history. I learned about a program called the Chrysler Institute of Engineering. There's a guy, I'd give special credit to, a guy by the name of Ron Kotz, who was in our HR department, basically personnel department in Highland Park. And I would say Ron really campaigned for me to join the company. I always think in the end, I was probably like the last CIE that came into the program. I worked super hard to get into the company. But in the end, I did. I succeeded, and that dream about having that Camaro turned into me speccing that G-body on the right. And that really became, I'll say, the rest of my life and the most impactful point for what my future would be like. When I entered the CIE program, I had the opportunity to go through all of these amazing experiences. I'll just go through them really fast. There's a place in Livonia called Motec where many of us had the chance to learn, get some hands-on training about being a mechanic, and the company really respected in that day, I would say, both intellectual knowledge and hands-on knowledge. And I gained so much from that. I worked, there's a little map in the middle, too hard for you to see, but of course it's an aerial shot of Highland Park. I worked in engine design and development on cranks. Suddenly one day when I was working at Sterling Heights Assembly, I got tagged by a guy named Chuck Keefe to come back to the body shop. And within minutes, I was in charge of body in white panel quality, which is definitely in that day an oxymoron. That's a picture of a P-body. We were building P-bodies and H-bodies in the time, but I learned so very much. I learned from the very best people in the company of how to do actual work. I had the chance in that image below. That's a picture of the Lamborghini Portofino. If you can flash back in that time, Mr. Iacocca had purchased Lamborghini, and this would be the right time for me to say that my sponsor in the program was a guy by the name of Dave Heyer. And Dave was, for me, an awesome sponsor. He helped me to do so very much in the company. And mostly he was guiding me as to what to do. But I had one dream, I mean, for sure, was like find out what's happening in the dome, what's happening in the styling department, because it was cordoned off. It was mysterious, let's say, to engineers. Dave hooked me up. He reached out to a guy named Bob Edwards, who was the chief engineer in the studio, and they placed me in the studio. And I learned so much. It was a crazy thing. I mean, if I flash forward to the end from a work point of view, one of the guys working in our studio was Dan Sims. Dan was working on Mitsubishi projects at the time. And when I come to tell you about my experience at Lordstown, don't I find that Dan Sims is the designer of the Lordstown truck, and we work once again together. But I learned from the most creative people, and I would say it had a big influence on me about how to work cross-functionally. Let's say not just the engineering point of view or the manufacturing, but really hear the view of the design office people. And this gave me a great benefit when I retired from the company. I ended up being the head of advanced engineering, where it's kind of a special job. It has to be a person who can work between the studio, between product development, and that's sort of a tightrope a little bit. Nobody's ever quite happy. But I mean, the punchline is I had so many amazing bits of knowledge I acquired, and probably most importantly, I acquired my wife in the course of this assignment. So Christine was working in the office there, and then we went on to raise a family with 3 kids. So I flash forward to the image in the right corner. It's kind of fun for me. That is Mr. Iacocca's limousine that we managed to, I guess you'd say, kind of swindle for the wedding. Up in the right corner, I worked at Chelsea at the Proving Grounds, along with a lot of the guys, really learning about vehicle development. And maybe flashback to Dave Heyer. Dave, as the head of Maserati technical operations, was leading the effort on what was called the Q body. And if you remember that, well, that was a challenging project for sure. And little did I know that 2 times in my life would it happen that I would work with Maserati, once here and once 30 years later. I really like that image because, well, that car looks really good there. It probably didn't look that good up close, I would say, in the day, but super experience. Anyhow, I had the great benefit to do this work through the CIE program. Then I went into the bulk of my career, and I'll just say that I worked on the LH cars. This was the time and place when we were going to develop the new platform. I want to say one more thing. I did a summer internship also at that place at Liberty and Technical Affairs. I worked under a guy named Jeff Jafrida. And Jeff, maybe some of you know him, he's like a master in suspension design. And that really gave me the passion of when the program was over to move back to LH. So here I am, that's a car called the Eagle Optima in the upper left corner. And Graham and so many of my colleagues here and I worked together on these cars. I mean, it was like a crazy time in our company. I think it was a time and place when we felt we could do anything. And we were focused in a very much of a team-oriented way. I have so much to be grateful for. Jim Super, a gentleman named Jim Super, was my leader. And these people who influenced me made such a difference in me, gave me the ability to understand teamwork that I'm grateful for today. I did something kind of radical. There's a picture of a JA there, but I did something radical and I actually requested to leave engineering and go work in manufacturing. And usually it's the opposite. But Glenn Gardner, who was leading the product team, welcomed me into doing that. I had no idea they would send me to the stamping division. I was more thinking about going someplace soft, so to speak. But I spent 3 years in the stamping division, including a year working in production at Sterling Stamping. And I easily credit that as the place I learned the very most in my life. I mean, if in this role I have today, where I deal with product quality, I would say when you're on the line and you're producing and you have to do quality, you grow up a lot. You find out the reality of what it takes in our industry. So super grateful for that. Then in a very fortunate move, I was afforded the opportunity to return back to product development. And I went to work on that's a 98 LH down in the bottom left-hand corner. And sort of a guy working from manufacturing, coming back to design, I had the opportunity to lead the team. Crazy experience. I worked under a launch leader, a guy by the name of Gino Raffin, who helped us launch the cars. But I knew that would happen. But the structure in our organization was so amazing, and I'm grateful for this to this day. I worked under a guy named Tom Hoskin with a lot of super experts. I mean, I'll say the technical competence of the company was so high still, and the organizational interest in working in a really good way was existing. And I treasure those days. I had the pleasure today now where Frank Glasgow gave me this memento of sorts, if you will, an org chart from the day. And for sure, this really got me on my way. It helped me to get recognized in the company. And I'm so appreciative, in fact, for that opportunity. So thank you, Frank. I put a picture of the Daimler Chrysler sign up at the top in the middle, and this Daimler Chrysler happened in that time. You know, most of my life, I consider myself to be a contrarian, and you'll see in a few ways I have a different view than the common one. I certainly believe that Daimler Chrysler could be such an amazing thing. Of course, it didn't work out. But on my personal basis, I was assigned in the body department to go work on the convertible. I guess there's kind of a funny story. We were building the convertible at the time in Toluca. And if any of you ever had the privilege to be in Toluca, it's an amazing place, right? Where almost anything can be done. There's a amazing work ethic. And if you know anything about convertibles, they're tricky cars to build in almost every way possible. And so let's say it was a perfect match between the capabilities and the design of the car. And I think it's credited to Chris Theodore to make the decision to bring the PT Cruiser to market by putting it into Toluca, which is a genius move for sure. But they had one consequence, is that the convertible needed to move out of Toluca and move into Sterling Heights Assembly. And that definitely ended up being like, square peg in a round hole. And we suffered a lot in that activity, but I had a lot of interest and enjoyment doing it. Most importantly, on our own, with a lot of support by our leadership, we built a real working alliance with the team in Stuttgart. We've worked on convertible projects together, and frankly, it's frustrating to me to this day is that the potential of that merger could have been great, and it's clear that we squandered it in so many ways at a leadership level. I had the chance then to move down to Plymouth Road. I don't know, a decade of hearing from guys in the company about that it's different at Jeep Truck and it's a better place to work and so forth. And I did get a chance. I went to work for Phil Jansen down there. I became the senior manager for the KJ and a great experience. We built a new plant in Toledo North, which exists to this day and generates a lot of revenue for the company out of Wrangler production. And what I really learned too, I still give crap to Phil and other people, is that I considered my experience at Jeep Truck at Plymouth Road to be amazing. There really was a great collaboration, but I flashed back to what we did in the upper left corner when we worked at Featherstone Road, and we did the same thing. When you put people together with a like purpose and a motivation and a drive, you can do amazing things. And that made an impact on me, and I've used that in some other points in my life. You know, everything can't be rosy, and these cars on the right reflect a real challenge I had in my career. I would say this is the point in time, the only time in my life where I truly felt I was being promoted beyond my capability. And suddenly one day I was made the senior manager for synthesis for these new generation of cars, the Caliber and Compass and Patriot. While the company was a wild place at that time too. We're aligned with Mitsubishi and with Daimler, but ultimately I became the synthesis manager of those vehicles, and I led some really good decisions and some not so good, and the car showed it. The thing is, things can usually have a happy ending, and every challenge that I experienced in that time, I put to work and committed to being better. And you'll see in the next chapter that it does become so much better. Last thing I'll say about that period of time, a good friend of mine, Tony Petit, who I worked together with so many people on that project, would say to me later that in that period, especially Dolan, we became durable. You know, if you could work through the Chrysler of these generations, you could do almost anything. And I felt exactly that way. So blessed, let's say, and so fortunate. And then things got amazing again. And this is another point where I'll be a bit of a contrarian. I know I put the Cerberus up there intentionally. It's kind of a bad word in the company. I have a completely different view, is that the genesis of how great we made Grand Cherokee started with the Cerberus team. I was in on the ground floor. We were developing the cars in a way to regain what we had once been. And I took a role there as the program management executive for that project. And the Cerberus team, frankly, more than anybody, opened up our imagination to what if the Chrysler, what if the Jeep cars are great again? What if they're not second rate? What if we fully stop this nonsense of the MCM and make fantastic cars? And I lived such a privileged existence. This, mind you, was following assignment I had taken in Stuttgart, where I learned so much about the good of the way of we could have worked together, but a failure that we had. So after I worked on the Grand Cherokee as the program manager, let's see what happened. Phil Jansen became now Fiat Chrysler entered the stage. Phil became the model responsible for Grand Cherokee. I think the company owes Phil a great debt of gratitude for those cars, especially. He, when it was dark and ugly and people were wondering about what we could do, especially the first gen cars, he really ensured that with a lot of bruises that they would be the amazing cars they are. Then I became extremely lucky. While Phil was nominated to be the model responsible for the Grand Cherokee, I was selected to be the model responsible for the Durango. So that's a Durango in the bottom left corner. Biased for sure. I think it's the greatest car we ever built in the company. We proved that what happens if you're focused and you really understand the customer, you can not only make great cars, but you can make great profit. And I like to say that's where I really learned in the company that the profit of the company is not obviously just a point of the cost position, but a gap between the revenue and the cost. And great cars, well done, can really be successful for the company. I closed my career at Chrysler in the advanced area. I spent a lot of time working on these alpha products, on rear drive strategies. I worked again, like I said, a kind of a flashback to Maserati, and worked on the Pacifica with just a absolutely amazing team. And then something weird happened where I thought I would work in the company for 45 years. Some guys came calling and asked for me to join the company outside of Chrysler. And this company is called A2 Mac 1. And I resisted them for quite a bit. But then I learned, I was just turning 55. And it turns out, you know, credit to the great programs that were in place, I could retire at the age of 55. And so I did. I entered a full retirement actually the day after I turned 55 at the end of February. So basically 5 years ago. I joined this company, and it's a technology company, but what I want to really share with you is that it's so much more, and it opened my eyes to this. What's called, what's commonly called today as data and analytics company. So in my whole life where I had worked on products that were physical that you could touch, this was basically building data. And sometimes you'll hear a term, you can read about this, it's really interesting, called software as a service, or models of companies that are called recurring revenue. And you create products, you create data and analytics, and you sell them multiple times in the industry, which makes it, I mean, a couple points. It makes it win-win in that the customers can buy the data at a low cost, something they never could afford on their own, and the company can generate great revenue and great profit margins. I mean, what's really important about the company is I really rose to a leadership level. For the first time in my life, I actually had the profit and loss responsibility for the U.S. division of this company. I was an advisor to the CEO. This is a Paris, France-based company, and some of my friends, I guess I would say I told you so, because I learned a lot about the French operating system a little bit. So I wish them lots of luck, but it was a great company, great experience for me. That came to an end after a couple years. I stayed on for another year and a half as an advisor to the company. And then down in the bottom, I don't really have a slide for that, but I basically created my own LLC. I did a project for a major worldwide automaker that really, I think it's the first time I've ever worked on my own on a project. Everything I'd done to this point in my life was the result of you, the result of all the people I was lucky enough to lead. And this was the first time I ever was able to really do it on my own. And I was successful at doing it, but even that was really based on what I had learned from so many people, and absolutely a great experience. After I ran the LLC for a while, I joined this company, Lordstown Motors. Some of you maybe know about Lordstown or have read about it. I joined Lordstown after their most famous period of existence. The company today had filed for bankruptcy, so they're not an existing entity anymore. But this was my chance to go work in the startup world. And I mean, not to go deep in on Lordstown, is an American-based company, overtook the General Motors Lordstown assembly plant, building a brand new from the ground up full-size pickup truck. Some really innovative concepts that have to do with the propulsion system. But what I learned the most was, now here's really a place where there's no backup at all. When you're in a startup company, we worked in the Farmington Hills office, but in that capacity, you do everything. There's no back office. So I kind of harkened back a little bit to the Jeep truck days and Liberty and Featherstone Road times. What I found again, though, it's all about people. Absolutely awesome people working in this place. I was responsible for two things at Lordstown, which kind of give you a little picture of what's going on in the EV industry. They've given me a really good picture about it. And basically, those are the cost structure of the vehicle. We were deep in development on this vehicle, and all I could say is that the cost structure was completely upside down. Like many of you, I'd worked on MCM projects in the past where we might have done a 10%, 5% cost reduction. These numbers are just sky high, owing a little bit to the nature of the lack of maturity in the industry. The second thing I was responsible for at Lordstown was for new product development, and a great experience. I stayed there through the end of the early part of 2022 when I joined JD Power. So I'm going to spend a few minutes, my remaining time, really talking about JD Power. As Chris said, my role at JD Power is responsible for global consulting. I lead this group called Product Quality Performance Improvement. And here we go again, JD Power is another data and analytics company. So I work in the consulting field of JD Power, but the company is really rooted in, we say we combine our data, I would say the best data in the world, primarily about this thing called voice of customer. What are the customers saying? We have amazing analytical tools, and I'm going to talk about some of those, including a little bit about AI. And then we have a really talented team that can do that, really experienced people. And what we do, basically, it's simple, is we help clients, automakers around the world, to help improve their business performance, and let's say just help them to hear the voice of the customer. I joined a lot of Chrysler alumni at JD Power. I just want to say that I work for Doug Betts, who many of you may know. Doug is the president of JD Power Automotive, and a couple colleagues you might know of mine, Kristen Kolodge, who's a longtime Chrysler employee. She runs the activity where we do syndicated studies, and also Elizabeth Creer, who joined when I did 2 years ago, and Elizabeth runs our electrification unit, and electrification is on everybody's mind, so I'll tell you a little bit about that. I'm just going to tell you a few of the things we do. I mean, the message is that we have a really rich data set completely. I'm going to go a little bit faster here. I want to talk about a study we have called IQS, and it's probably the most well-known part of JD Power. We turn out to be a highly recognized company in the U.S. for sure. People know us from the advertisements that winning manufacturers are able to apply. I want to tell you how IQS works for a minute. That will create the potential to explain some other products. So more or less, basically, we check the registration in the US of new cars. And historically, in a window, a 4-month window, we mail out requests for surveys to those people that register. We roughly mail out about 1 million per year. Maybe you've received one along the way. We historically provide a crisp US $1 bill, and now we provide the chance to join a sweepstakes. In this study called IQS, we survey the whole industry. We ask a battery of 223 questions according to 9 categories. So, interior, exterior, infotainment, seating, powertrain, and so on and so forth. And we rank the industry. So what we basically do that's very unique is, the automakers know their own situation. The folks, you can be sure, in Auburn Hills have a good understanding of their performance. What they're blind to is the relative performance compared to their competitors. We categorize those data. We basically break the cars down by vehicle lines, and we award, let's say, top segment performers. There's a lot of vehicles listed here. This just happens to be last year's performance. To give you a snapshot, I would say who wins in the segments in current times. General Motors wins a large number of segments, and generally the Hyundai Motor Group. Hyundai Motor Group, of course, as you may know, has become like a powerhouse in the industry for customer satisfaction. But this past year was a really cool year also for the Stellantis Group, and a couple of brands people didn't expect to be top performers, like Alfa came into their own, Gladiator, as well as Ram vehicles. We do the same thing. We look at the data. We ask these questions to customers in 2 categories: things that we call design problems, or we call them difficult to use. The system's working the way it should, but people have a problem with it. And the rest of the questions we ask are related to what we call defects or malfunctions. Something's not working correctly. And on the basis of the things that aren't working correctly in the view of the customers, we award plant awards also. And to summarize that small font for you, I would say the perennial powerhouse in plant awards is Toyota, probably Toyota, BMW. They have exceptional ability to ship cars without defects. And everybody, I would say, in the industry is pretty much on their back. So that was really about problems. We're asking people what problems they have. We'd ask you, did you have a problem pairing your phone? Did you have a problem with the powertrain? Did you have a check engine light? In EVs, did you have problems charging? Things of that nature. Then to get a sense of what is consumer behavior really like, we check a whole different mindset. We call this the appeal journey. And we're asking people, I'll say, more what we call the experiential situation with the vehicle. How do you feel about the car? And there's some interesting cars that, could have a lot of problems, but people are fans of them. You would say that in current times about Teslas. Teslas have a relatively high defect malfunction score, but Tesla owners have been, I'll just say, highly enthusiastic about their cars. Wranglers, you'd say about Wranglers. We could find potentially defects in Wranglers, but if you know anybody that's had a Wrangler, ask them how they feel about it, and they love their car. What's interesting about this part of the data, in contrast to the IQS data, is that we measure a third thing. And the third thing is called NPS. It's called Net Promoter Score. And I would venture a guess that everybody here who has participated in NPS in some way, it's this kind of standard single question that says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this product or service to your friends and family? We always ask that question at the beginning. And I'll just say what we know about the response to that is that it's highly correlated to appeal. What it means is that there's always a pursuit of having fewer problems in cars, but the emotional appeal, emotional attachment that comes from appeal will really create a relationship that probably leads to repeat purchase and loyalty. So we do that for appeal. I'm going to skip through those results in the interest of time a little bit, but there's Once again, I would say a powerhouse in the industry is tending to be some of the Asian brands, some of the German brands. This year, actually, both Jag and Dodge at a brand level did really well. The top performing vehicle for this past year in appeal was the 911, which has been a traditionally strong performer. We do one more study. Now we go these. I didn't make that clear. Those two studies are done at 90 days of ownership. So the customers had received that 3 months into the ownership experience. Now we repeat this question after 3 years. And we call this VDS, but basically the vehicle dependability survey. So we're getting a little bit of a feeling about what happens after maybe the love has worn off a little bit. And these results were just released by us last week. I'll just say in a simple nutshell would be that Toyota and Lexus are menacing everybody when it comes to this. They have extremely high performance. This generally would be characterized by if you buy a car and you don't do much to it 3 years in, you're exceedingly happy. You're surprised, and particularly I would say both Lexus and Toyota are able to do amazingly well in that way. Tell you about one more product we have called warranty and repair analytics. This is probably the most exciting new thing we do at JD Power. A company like Stellantis certainly knows about the warranty effect happening in the company. What they might not know is how that warranty compares to their competitors. And we bought and integrated a company last year that gives us access to the warranty data in the US for all companies. So we could compare, let's say hypothetically, a General Motors product to a Toyota product at the warranty repair level, the incidents. This is really valuable to companies in terms of customer satisfaction, which we work on, but also you can imagine in terms of cost, warranty costs for the company and so forth. I want to talk about electrification for a moment. We could talk for hours about this. It's the most interesting topic. Elizabeth runs a really fascinating team in our company. I think what I would just do to say, we run a number of studies to gauge interest for customers in EVs. The current prognosis we have is that EV interest has been growing and growing and growing, and let's say the slope of the curve has, I wouldn't call it an inflection point, but it's decreased. And to make a very complicated topic brief, I would say it's largely related to the charging experience and the range anxiety. There are issues about the total cost of ownership, but this anxiety that comes for customers about what to do in terms of charging capability, charging presence, is likely to be the number one barrier to increasing the adoption rate. Naturally, you can see from Washington to Detroit and all places around, there's discussion of how to remedy that, usually with massive expenditures to grow the capability. I'm happy to talk to any of you afterwards about this, or if you have any questions. The other factor I just wanted to mention is that it's widely known in the US that there are significant federal incentives for the purchase of an EV. And since we gauge customer interest monthly, we know these are very confusing. In Congress, they have changed the regulation almost by the month related to the source of the materials for the battery in the vehicles, and it leads to a lot of confusion. Fact of the matter is Tesla has major advantages particularly in the idea about charging, having access to the supercharger network. Last little tidbit I'll share with you today before I take some questions in a moment is it also has to do not only if you find a charger, but if it's up and running. And kind of off the cuff number, the uptime, the reliability of the Tesla supercharger network is about 97%. And I'll say generally speaking, the reliability of the non-Tesla network is around 80+%. It means in those cases of non-Tesla superchargers, it means even if you wait, 1 out of 5 of them may not function. Function can mean it won't take your transaction, it won't charge, who knows what, but you can see that it leads to a lot of so I'm going to pass on these. Just going to talk briefly about these to close in a minute. China. All I want to say is maybe if you have some free time, maybe search on Google the presence of Chinese cars. Chinese cars from the period of COVID and beyond are the most significant driving force in the industry. If I say Chinese cars 5 years ago, you might have rolled your eyes. I would only say, trust me for a minute, but go check it. I would say that Chinese cars are leading the world in technology execution. These are just like a myriad of cars. The Aito M9 is a big popular SUV on sale. The brand on the upper right corner is a car called the BYD Seal. Probably many of you heard about BYD. It's a Warren Buffett invested company. This car in the lower corner, I took that photo when I was in Europe. It's called a Hi-Fi Z. The Netta U Pro is a car that sells for about $40,000, full EV. SUVs, crossovers, you name it. Generally, cars of superior technical performance, high technical performance at incredibly low pricing. This is a major threat. There's legislation in the US that taxes significantly cars imported from China, but this is a main topic. Basically, during the period of COVID and beyond, the Chinese manufacturers were investing heavily, and these are all what they call new energy vehicles. They're all BEVs that are part of a national policy in China. Last thing I'll leave you with about the Chinese situation is the entry point into the US through Mexico. And I would say we're approaching 10 companies now of Chinese origin who are operating in Mexico, planning to produce in Mexico, and it could be seen as a bit of a path into the US. If there was a lesson to be learned about the Japanese cars in the 60s and 70s and the Korean cars, I would say it's on steroids with the Chinese cars. Now at JD Power, we're a worldwide company. We have a massive office in Shanghai. We work with these manufacturers. We really work always in the interest of the voice of the customer. I would say check them out. They're super interesting. The interiors, the content that they have is, I wouldn't say mind-boggling, but it's approaching it. It's happening all around the world. By the way, these are 3 other brand new manufacturers in the last couple of years: VinFast in Vietnam, TOG in Turkey, and Sear in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Last topic, AI. We announced a partnership with a company called Palantir, who's a big player in artificial intelligence last year. And because I told you we're a data and intelligence and analytics company, this was really important to us. Something like you have too much data, you can't organize it in the right way. So we use a tool, I'm going to do this very quickly, but we use a tool called GPT-4. You might have heard of ChatGPT. Maybe you heard that term. We integrate this tool in this partnership we have with Palantir. And basically what it's changing the way we work completely by the week, I would say right now. It gives us the potential to do this big analysis. Imagine that I wanted to know about, I have a lot of data in my company about how customers perceive touchscreens and ease to use. What if I wanted to really cross-check that against, I don't know, the age of the customers, the location in the US that they're operating, how many miles they drive per year. It gets really complicated to find, let's say, pieces of information that are valuable to take action on. And the suite of tools the tool set here is called Palantir Foundry, but basically the suite of tools that I have on the screen, I'll just say makes it easy. On the middle of the screen, I wrote in the word prompt. Prompt is you just ask the question. I just say, tell me about a correlation between running Apple CarPlay and customer problems with pairing their phone. And input data, I just put some data in, like it's dragging. It's almost looking in your directory. You tell it where to look for data or not. You can let it go to the web or you can contain it. At a company like JD Power, we contain the data to, say, keep garbage data out of the system, and you get an output. I did 2 examples for today that I thought would be kind of fun. I asked the tool to suggest 10 topics for future NCRO meetings, and in 7 seconds, it came up with 10 pretty good ones, actually. The tool is really cool because you can filter it. It gives you an answer, and you say, well, that's kind of strange. I didn't mean that. You just change in English. You don't have to know Python or one of these programming languages. You just change it in English what you want, and you say, I didn't mean that. I meant, okay, give me speakers, but let's make the speakers located in the Metro Detroit area. And you can put that in, and you get an answer usually in a second or 2. So the message I want to say is you can do big analysis in a way we never could. I did one more. I asked the system what were the 20 best Chrysler vehicles built in a certain period. Spits out the answer in 9 seconds, and of course you could do anything. You could work with it. There's some things you can do online for fun if you want. I think on Google, it's called Bard. But there's a lot of things. If you just check the browser, it'll do amazing things. The fact of the matter is we're using it twofold: to improve our efficiency, and number 2, to draw new data connections. Okay, in the end, I want to close with my life and experience is so blessed. Based on these things, basically people, products that I've worked on, and this passion that I was lucky enough to develop. I like what Mr. Chrysler said at the beginning is make it fun. It's certainly been beneficial for me, not only for us, but for those coming after us. I put a couple images of a program I did while I was at Chrysler called Winning Futures Mentoring. And this young man, Matt Alexander, I mentored for a number of years down at Cast Tech, super successful engineer now working in the field. And so there's a little bit about not only do it for ourselves, but help people around us. I think it's what I found to be really satisfaction. Don't Let the Old Man In is popular, if you know that now. It's popular this week because of Toby Keith, and it's a song that's on the charts again. And he wrote that based on a conversation he had that basically said, keep active. And I learned already today what so many of you are doing. I think that's fascinating. My gig happens to be working in this car stuff, which is really fun, but whatever you're doing, baseball leagues and all other kinds of things, I think it's awesome completely. No doubt about it, from my point of view, absolutely the best time ever to work in the auto industry. There's this talk about it's, what's good in the day. It's so good right now because I believe anything's possible. And like I said, the best one is when we give something back. So we've got a few minutes here, I think, for Q&A, maybe 10 minutes or so. I just want to thank you for your attention and the chance to be with you today. I'll take any questions you have at all.
Hi, Jack. Alex Dominique here. Just your all-time favorite Chrysler vehicle again?
Because it's cool, and it's a car I own, and I'm so glad you asked me. It's actually that one in the upper right corner. It's a 62 Chrysler 300. I own that car. My advice to you as a crowd would be, if you have a cool car, don't sell it. I sold that car, but unbelievable car. It's still in, I'm gonna get away from that. It's still in a very can-do way and way of thinking in the company. So actually that car I have a lot of passion. Those are some other cars that I've had, but I would call a 62 300. Those cars were done, if you guys know this probably well, those cars were done under the guidance of a guy named Virgil Exner. And it brought on an idea in the company called the forward look. And okay, that car is actually a 62, so it doesn't have wings on it still, but my gosh, if you've been in these cars, the feeling of being open, hardtop glass with no pillars on them. And so anyhow, a simple car, but it's my favorite personally.
So Jack,
You could just yell.
is this going through? Okay. One of the biggest quality stories, of the last 30 some years has been, as you mentioned, the turnaround of the Korean automotive base. Many of us recall back in the 80s, Hyundai had a plant in Quebec for a bit, and that place eventually imploded because the quality was so terrible in that era. And even as late as 2000, their quality numbers were twice as many things gone wrong as most anyone else in the industry. Today, that's the opposite, as you correctly pointed out very well. Like, what I'm just curious if, in your travels and your work at JD Power, do you have any insight as to how the Koreans have so successfully turned things around?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Graham. So if you could all hear, Graham was just asking basically, how did this happen for Hyundai, Kia, Genesis? Basically, how did they become sort of the worst to, in many measures, the best? And I mean, that's really simple for us. We've been a long strategic partner at JD Power with Hyundai, Kia, but we play only a small role in their success. There's so much going on in that company. The first and foremost is that it's a commitment from the very top, unrelenting. These guys are relentless about being number one in satisfaction, won't take no for an answer. Any problem, they work, I would say, like animals to fix. They allow for us to be transparent. There's no problems that our customers find in the surveys that OEMs don't know about. It's not like JD Power finds new things that the experts in Stellantis don't really know about. We point out comparisons to other vehicles. I'll say that Hyundai Kia operates in a way where there's full transparency. Sometimes issues are known but not acted on. And then I would just say, Graham, I'm so glad you asked, incredible work ethic and dedication. When in my intro, it was mentioned that I had the chance through Chrysler to go to the Michigan State Executive MBA. So 1999, we traveled to Asia. In 1999, we went to the big Hyundai plant in Ulsan, and these cars were not good. They were not good at all, but we met with the senior leadership team, and it was crazy. But at that time, the senior leadership said, basically in 10 years, we will be a leading car maker. We're going to train people in all disciplines. We've studied everybody. We've studied what happened, the American miracle, the German miracle. What happened in Japan. And I would say what I see is like a relentless pursuit of that. It's actually why I have the statement on there in my closing about anything is possible. And that could happen in any place. They've perfected it. Direction from the top that the customer is super important. Clear transparency in the company, and then a intensive dedication, I would say. Possible for anybody, actually. Thanks.
I was formulating this question while you were answering that, Jack. I think you may have answered it, but just as a personal note for Chrysler or Stellantis, what would your advice be to get to that kind of position beyond what you just said? Or is it basically encapsulated in what you just said?
It's perfect, Bob. Thanks. I would say what I said, that's a good model, but every company has to have their own MO. And for me, the great thing that so many of you know about here is Chrysler over the years has had its MO, had a way. And I would say, number one, stay true to that and relentlessly focus on the customer. Big companies can be successful. HMG is a big company, but we use a term inside of JD Power called truth tellers. We say we're truth tellers. Frankly, I'm fortunate enough to be in the boardrooms around the world with automakers. And one of the key services that we provide them is to explain what their customers are saying. Sometimes that can be, they might not get to the very top, but my feeling about Chrysler is, if you look at that history, read that book, think about what's been great, is have this passion and basically be who the company really wants to be. It's hard in a big company, a global company, but be focused, I would say. Then the Hyundai principles otherwise are quite good, I would say.
What does Chrysler need to do to make changes to their vehicles when customers see that there's a problem, but it takes years to get that problem implemented into the vehicle?
I mentioned that word at the beginning that my dad taught me about, and we use that word a lot, frankly, at JD Power. It's called empathy, and it means to have empathy for the customers, to like make it crystal clear that you understand what's happening to the customers and you take action. I mean, as evidenced in our results in recent JD Power surveys, in many capacities, the vehicles of Stellantis, of the Chrysler Group, are performing at a really high level. The Alpha team is a really interesting example. There are like some significant challenges in the products. There were big actions taken that are reflected in the results. I would say make that widespread. Jay mentioned about the Halcyon. I looked at it this morning online, and that would be definitely worthwhile for all of you to look at. I mean, I guess one last thing I would say is the Tesla miracle is something really to be studied. And I know there's a lot of discussion about Tesla. The guy's famous. The cars are amazing technically, and they have a very strong appeal from the customers. And I don't mean, by the way, to follow Tesla, but I mean to like find your way and do it. But so there is great success. I mentioned Alpha. The Ram brand, look at what's happening in the Ram brand, right? There's really loyal customers for sure. And there's a bunch of driven people in Auburn Hills and around the world working on improving. I mean, the business is tough. There's companies everywhere on earth. You know, when I showed the Chinese companies, by the way, there's 200 automakers in China. I showed you 8 of them. There's over 100 making over like 10,000 cars per year. So they're headed towards consolidation. But what I also mean is they want to eat our breakfast. They want to get in on it. But yeah, head down and do it, I would say.
I have a question, Jack.
Yes, sir. Oh, no, yeah, very good.
JD Power, here, invoice to the customer, okay, very key. The fact is that we've gone through probably the last 4 or 5 years here, it appears that the upper echelon has ignored that aspect. We showed a timeline, we've been showed a timeline to 2050, the fact that when EVs will be the driving force here, okay? But yet they've taken it upon themselves to ignore what dealers are saying, what everybody else is saying. Follow your timeline. Mary Barra is probably the best example of that right now. Seems like, everybody's saying, hey, we got, why don't we have hybrids, more something we could sell. People don't want these vehicles yet. It isn't time for them yet. What does JB Power say to this?
I mean, we focus not only on the voice of customer, but other data and other metrics in the industry like pricing and performance and so forth. What I would say a little bit is that with some compassion for the automakers, it's a complex world. The legislation that's on the table for them to achieve requires, anecdotally, you would say it requires a higher level of electrification than we can sense and acceptance for. So it's, in other words, let's say directly, it's not legal at some point to produce cars that don't achieve that. Of course, there's a lot being made in the news recently about the Toyota strategy. Toyota's long been a leader in hybrids, and it's a very powerful solution. It's more or less easy to talk to customers. We know that. We talk to customers about hybrids, and they consider it to be I'll say a very practical solution. It can be an EV if it has a significant battery size when it wants to be, and you don't have to have the range anxiety. We actually really survey what customers say, and that's where the voice we bring to the team. I know that in the Ram brand, they're bringing some really innovative products that are in some way like that give flexibility to customers for range and electrification. It's the whole thing. It's a little bit voice. I think voice of customer is extremely important. It's a core part of what we do. And I would say, having said that, there's 20 other pieces of the pie that would have to be dealt with, Fed regs and other policies. So take a look at what the Ram team are doing. It's interesting to us, at least. We'll see how the market responds. The Toyota Lexus solutions are really interesting that are in the market now. It does require cooperation with the federal government to find a way to achieve it. So
One more. Last one.
Thank you. You had 33 years at Chrysler. You just announced that a successful car company has, well, maybe it was Hyundai and Kia, have full transparency. So looking back at Chrysler, could you cite some example where, we would have benefited from full transparency?
Why not? Yeah, I mean, that's funny. No, that's a good question. No, it's okay. I'm fine. I would say, and as close as coming to a specific, I would say that my experience, and I'm referring to the company that I worked in, which is dated, is that as a model, the one model for sure that should be implemented is that when outsiders are not in the room, then there is full transparency. It's sometimes complicated when you have constituents who are from outside the company in the room. I get that, right? We're a public-facing company. But I would say that in my old life, I was in the room many times when it was only, we used to say blue badge, just basically Chrysler employees, and we still couldn't put it out on the table. How could we fix that? I think the single best thing I know I've experienced in my life is, it's funny, good basic human behavior, a lack of fear and retribution. And basically, that's not just true for Chrysler, it's true for all companies, but being in an environment where if you're my leader, you're my executive, you want me to tell you exactly what's going on, whether it follows the pattern of what you believe, and you reward that. It doesn't have to be chaotic. It's a good environment. One more point about that. I'm super proud of that. When I was working on the new minivan program, we borrowed a concept from Toyota called Obeya. You can look that up, Obeya. Just in Japanese, it basically means the big room. And the principle at Toyota, pretty well practiced, you know, they're humans, but pretty well practiced is to put all the constituents at the table at one time. Generally speaking, in their model, the chief engineer, who would have not only engineering responsibility, but project responsibility, financial and otherwise, would be at the center of the room. And, you know, in English, we would say, put all the cards on the table, like evaluate the decision on the basis of all cards. So I would say that. I would say work towards all of us, not just Chrysler, every company, it's true of myself, work for better human decency, respect for people, transparent environment. You know, you get another reward out of it. You get super motivated employees, right? That are then trust how decisions are made. So I'm not singling out Chrysler in that regard because I think it's a human condition, but that's a model that I've seen that works. So.
Jack,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, most of all, thank you, Jack Dolan, for a nice presentation here. A lot of good questions. Secondly, we got a bunch of punch keys here. With containers, you can take some home, okay? And drive safe.